Afternoon, everyone. I hope you can hear me loud and clear. So this is the third EUPATI Network webinar. Welcome. It's now 5:05 Central European Time. So thank you to all of you who've been waiting patiently for this call, and we're just going to begin now. So this is the EUPATI Network webinar on strengthening patient involvement in health technology assessment. We've got action-packed agenda and covering a lot of topics that we hope will be of interest to you all. I think it's going to be of interest because we've had a high number of participants who have registered to listen into today's call. It's from a variety of backgrounds. So we've got members of patient associations, from the industry associations, from professional bodies as well. So hopefully that indicates the high level of interest we have in HTA. We've also got a good spread of people from Europe and beyond joining us today, so welcome to everyone. And this is the agenda that you see on the screen now. And at the end of the presentations by our panelists, you're going to get the opportunity to put your questions and any comments you have forward. Please use the chat function, which is should be on the bottom right of your screen. Just feel free to type in your questions as they arise, and we will look to answer them definitely at the end of the session. So we're very much hoping for interactive session today and discussions all around. I just want to introduce our first two speakers. So firstly, we have Karen Facey, who is an independent evidence-based health policy consultant. She's worked in medicines R&D, regulation, and HTA. She has also established a process of HTA in Scotland that presented patient issues alongside clinical and cost effectiveness in HTA report. Karen is very passionate about the value of involving patients in the HTA process, as you'll hear. Mead is our second presenter today, and he's the Director of Policy at Genetic Alliance UK, the national charity of over 180 patient organisations supporting all those affected by genetic conditions. Genetic UK and EGAN's policy work focuses on research and innovation that facilitates progress towards cure and treatments for the unmet health needs. So Genetic Alliance UK's work also includes leading the Rare Disease UK campaign and the SWAN UK group, which supports families of children with undiagnosed conditions. So we look very much to hearing from both Karen and Nick. And at this point, I'm actually going to give the floor now to Karen so that she will be able to walk us through and give us the HTA introduction.
Thank you very much, Daphne. It's a real pleasure to be speaking to members of EUPATI and, in a sense, visitors to EUPATI this afternoon in the third webinar to talk about health technology assessment, HTA for short. And we're going to start with a introduction. And we need to start with thinking about what health technology assessment is. It's a strange word, it's a long word, and it's one which has many different meanings. Here's a definition which is commonly used, which has been created by the European Network for HTA. That HTA is a multidisciplinary process that summarizes information about the medical, social, economic, and ethical issues related to the use of a health technology in a systematic, transparent, unbiased, robust manner. Now, the definition written by a big committee, which is why it's so long and unwieldy, but it's actually really important because what it's saying is that many governments want to evaluate how they should use health technologies. And by health technologies, we mean any kind of health intervention. That could be medicines, but it could also be new screening approaches, new vaccines, new diagnostics, new medical devices, education and rehabilitation programs. Health authorities need to make decisions about these kind of health interventions. HTA is a process which we say should evaluate these technologies in a systematic, transparent and robust way, in a way that looks at not just the clinical issues associated with a new intervention, but also the broader social, ethical, and economic issues. And so what this process is trying to do is inform policy and decision making at government and Ministry of Health level. So HTA decisions are used quite often to make important decisions about whether a new health technology is reimbursed or made available to patients in a healthcare system. And it's had increasing importance in the last decade or so as it has been used more commonly to relate to the reimbursement of medicines. And what HTA is trying to determine is whether a new health intervention, for example, a new medicine, is providing added value compared to what is currently used in a health system. And that added value may be purely on clinical benefit grounds, but it could also be in terms of value for money. So what HTA is trying to decide is, should new technology be invested, and who should we make it available to? Now, HTA is a scientific process, but it's working in a policy context. So most HTA systems try to do is to take the best scientific evidence, often from international clinical trials, but then use that international evidence, take decisions at a local level. So that could be a national country level, or it could be a regional level if you're in a country like Spain or Italy that has regionalised healthcare. So it's international evidence in a local context. And one very common model used for health technology assessment has been devised by the European Network for HTA, EUnetHTA, and it can be thought of in these 9 so-called domains, where we look at the health problem, so that is the burden of the condition being studied. What is the technology that we're looking at? Is it a medicine? How often do you take it? Is it a medical device that needs to be looked at in a particular context, say in radiology? We look at the safety of the product and we look at its clinical effectiveness, or its long-term outcomes. And those are the 4 areas that nearly every country looks at. Some countries also look at the domain there in red, cost economic evaluation. Not every country does this, but many countries are now using this. And there is fear among some that HTA is being dominated by this economic evaluation. I would also say that the elements in brown are important as well. That is the ethical, organisational aspects and legal aspects. And the elements where really patient perspectives should come into play, but often don't feature strongly enough. So part of our discussion today is to take this quite scientific and political context of HTA and to see how we can strengthen patient involvement in this process of HTA to make sure it's really delivering the best answers possible. We have just decided that we're going to have a slight rhythm of the ordering of the slides, so please excuse me as I skip through the slides there. I'm going to go straight to my second set of slides, which really are that introduction to HTA to talk about how we can really improve patient involvement in HTA, what's happening at the moment around Europe, and would be improved. And Nick will be coming after me to give some life examples of how patients can really make a difference in HTA and decision making. So if we look at HTA in a different way, here's a diagram, and it's a pyramid. We often use pyramids when we think about evidence-based medicine. And you can see at the top of our pyramid, we have a stack of papers. This is all the scientific work that goes into health technology assessment to identify whether a health intervention is clinically effective, requires a tremendous amount of scientific effort in clinical trials and in all kinds of studies. And to look at this scientific evidence, either researchers in health technology assessment agencies will search literature to find scientific studies, or ask manufacturers of the health intervention to submit evidence about how well the product works and how safe it is. This is combined in the bottom right-hand corner. We see the clinicians there. The opinions of local clinicians will be really important to help bring the context of all that international evidence into play for the local setting, because every care setting is different. So in every country, we need to think about how a new product would fit in a clinical pathway. Then in some countries, there is also another perspective that's very important, and it is the patient perspective. Now, in some countries, because unfortunately it's not the case that every country takes account of patient perspectives, and we'll think about that. But I believe that involving patient perspectives is an essential part of this pyramid, HTA, because all of these things need to combine scientific evidence, clinical opinion, and patient views, and judgments need to be made to create recommendations about whether a product should be made available or not. And in HTA, we recognise the value of patient perspectives early in the 2000s. And, a number of us in Europe worked together to create a guide for patients called Understanding HTA. And this has actually been translated into a range of languages and is available on the Health Technology Assessment International website for anybody to freely use. And I recommend that you use that if you're interested in more detail about the HTA process. But the bottom line is that none of us believe that it's patients and carers or their caregivers who understand what it's like to live with an illness day in, day out. And those experiences are important when determining the value of a new technology. And what patients can give us is their unique knowledge, their perspectives about not only living with the illness, but also their experiences of care in the health system, and experiences with current treatments, and their expectations and hopes for new treatments. Part of the problem is that although I'm passionate about the value of patient involvement in HTA, not everybody is within the HTA society. That comes from the fact that many policymakers are concerned that patients' views are subjective, they are biased, perhaps by industry, are representative of a wide view of patients. These questions are often asked. So we need to think about how we can gather important patient perspectives and include them in this very scientific and political process. I believe that patients can be involved at every stage of the HTA, from when we think about how we design studies to show clinical benefit, to we decide which topics we assess, through writing HTA reports, and indeed through to engaging patients in the process of HTA and evolution. So I believe patients can be involved everywhere, and we'll look at a particular part of that. Patients can submit evidence. I said that evidence is scientific, but patients have a lot of information they can provide, and Nick will give some examples of this. The HTA, we have worked with HTA agencies to bring together their processes and have identified that many agencies do have forms which they give to patient groups to provide information to an HTA. And I believe you have been sent or will have access to our standard patient group submission form. And it covers a number of areas and tries to give patient groups prompts which they might consider when writing a response. So when they have to answer the question, how does the condition or disease for which health intervention is being addressed affect patients, you can see they've listed some bullet points where ask ask about different aspects of the condition, the areas that patients find difficult to undertake, the emotional and psychological aspects, and these are things that could influence decision makers. And this form also looks at their experience with current interventions and experience with new interventions. So if we think about HTA, a scientific process, but one which is trying to inform decision making, it's often considered as a bridge between those things, between science and decision making. And I like to think of a bridge like one shown here in the picture, which has lights on it. So for me, patients' perspectives can illuminate that bridge between scientific evidence and policy making, because patients can tell us the things that matter most. Where is their greatest need for new therapies? What is added value? And how can work with all stakeholders to make sure that we're getting the very best evidence possible and making sure that we have access to the most effective therapies? One of the pieces of work that we've done within Health Technology Assessment International is to try and promote good practice for patient involvement in HTA, and we've created the values and standards for patient involvement in HTA. And I believe, again, you've been sent this rather small poster. We identify 5 values for way patients should be involved in HTA and 10 standards, and have really been drawn from very best practice internationally. And we encourage HTA agencies to take up these values and standards. There has been, as I've indicated, some concern about the way patient involvement is undertaken. England, Wales and Scotland have pretty good processes that have been around now for about a decade. But Scotland actually promotes the HTA values and quality standards on its website. If we in other countries, countries like Italy, although have limited patient involvement in decision making at the moment, do very good work in terms of building capacity of patient organisations to get involved in HTA, and very detailed 6-day training programme for patients and citizens through the Active Citizens Network. In Germany, they have quite a different process for HTA, and there they have a large group of self-help, or what we would call patient groups, that contribute to their appraisals. So they have a pool of about 300 experts, and they are drawn upon to get involved in individual HTAs, and indeed they can initiate their own research with the help of HTA staff. So there are a range of different approaches around Europe, and it's important that we don't think that one size fits all. We need to do something that's appropriate for the country. So in terms of the forward, we clearly have some challenges to face. And the first one is we have to be clear that it's always a challenge for a government who has to provide health care for all patients to be able to balance the needs of one individual group advocating for a specific disease. So we have to think about how patients can be involved in the fair allocation of resources. I counsel that we need to avoid adversarial approaches and think about how we can work together to make sure that patient perspectives are really used in health technology assessment. We certainly need to build resources, not only of patient groups, but within HTA bodies to help them understand why patient involvement is important, and need training for both staff and patient groups. I think we need to recognise also that patient involvement is a journey. Some organisations have been doing it for a long time, but we shouldn't seek to emulate them. We should look at our own system and recognise we need to take one step on that journey. We need to think about how in new HTA processes we can embed patient involvement from the outset. Indeed, within HTAI, we're seeking to develop a roadmap for patient involvement in HTA. And what, of course, we need most of all is well-trained patient representatives. And that's why I think the work of EUPATI is so important. And indeed, one of their whole modules of their training program is about HTA. And that's been an overview from me. I shall look forward to hearing your questions later. And I'm now going to hand the microphone over to Nick.
Thanks very much, Karen. I think my presentation is going to be very complementary to Karen's. I'm going to give you a few examples of how patients' voice has been involved in access decisions and also how we might change it in the future. So, first of all, who am I? I'm Director of Policy at Genetic Alliance UK, which is the national charity working to improve the lives of patients and families affected by all types of genetic conditions. We've got 180 patient organisation members now. We've been around for about 25 years. Because almost every genetic condition is rare, we have a big focus on access to rare disease medicines in our organisation. A lot of the examples I'm going to be giving today will be related to NICEs, and NICE is the Wales and England Health Technology Appraisal Body, their approach to rare diseases, which is entitled the Highly Specialised Technology Programme. I'm going to talk about 4 different types of patient voice. Patient voice as information providers, patient voice in decision making, patient voice policy development, and patient voice as an individual. It is a even more cumbersome definition of health technology assessment, which is probably an older one than the one Karen presented. But the message here is that without information, it's really tough to do health technology assessments. And look forward, the patient voice is a really important and deliver patient information to the health technology appraisal process. So we need to understand before we can make a decision about any kind of treatment, or before we can really understand the value of any treatment. How are actually going to be using this intervention? Will the whole population that are affected by a particular disease need the medicine or want the medicine? What's the condition that we're trying to treat here, and how does it affect my daily life? Is it a chronic condition? Does it develop? Does it get more serious as the condition goes on? And at what stage of the condition would treatment be given? And be given treatment given in an ideal scenario, the best place to deliver it, and then also talk about when the most cost-effective time in the development of the condition would be the best time to deliver the treatment. How are we going to actually get this medicine to patients? Is it a daily injection in a centre of excellence in one part of a country, or can we take pills on a weekly basis? That's really important to patient life, and it really needs to be taken into account when making decisions about access to medicines. And really, what does the medicine do, and how does it help the patient? How much does it cost, and what change? What would our decision, if we were to decide to access to treatment, what would that give to the health service? Now, before we actually start delivering our health technology appraisal process, we actually have to say, do these things even make sense for my condition? And should we be asking this question in the context of the treatment that we're going to look at? The design of health technology appraisal process is in part the bit of the process where you decide what questions to ask. So if we start answering them, what questions are we actually going to ask? NICE call this the scoping stage of their assessment, and we've found, specifically as an umbrella organisation, that this is actually sometimes more crucial than the information delivery stage, where you actually start answering the questions, because if you don't make sure the question you want to answer is in the technology appraisal process, then you'll be able to provide the information that you'd like to give. So a couple of examples here. from the highly specialized technology evaluation of elastoase alpha, which is a treatment for a mucopolysaccharide disease called MORCHIO, or mucopolysaccharidosis type 4. This is some examples from the MPS Society's submission to NICE's scoping phase. The Society is potentially and characteristically well organised as a patient organisation in the UK, and you'll see the benefit of that organisation further on. But I'll discuss the fact that they're not a typical patient organisation following this. So the first example is the population size. NICE write a draft scope, and the purpose of this, it's a straw man. We're going to look at it and we're going to criticise it. NICE do their best, and I think it's important for me to recognise that the progress NICE has made in engaging patients, and also the quality of the approach they go to. That doesn't mean that we can't improve it. So our scope for this treatment, an estimate of the population that live with mucopolysaccharidosis type 4A in England. And you can see here that they used a reputable source of evidence. This is from peer-reviewed literature, the population size, and it's very credible. But when the MPS Society came along, their response, because the MPS Society have a registry, they have a register of every case of any mucopolysaccharide disease in the UK, they were able to say, actually, you're out by a factor of 2, and you've overestimated. You've more than doubled the number of people that are living with the diagnosis in England. And they can say with certainty that if we start trying to multiply the cost of this disease by the number of people that might be taking it, then the draft scope for NICE's evaluation would have doubled the cost of the health service of using this medicine. So you can see here that patient organisations aren't restricted to the kind of experience feedback of what it's like to live with a condition, or evident information they would only know because they're patients. We're also potential credible information sources for the whole range of information you might want to know about a particular condition. And in this case, their organisation and the state of their registry was an enormous resource for the technology evaluation here. The most example is the draft scope, which defined which outcomes should be considered when judging the efficacy of this medicine. You can see here there's, again, a really good list of things that you'd probably want to take account of in the case of this particular rare disease. So does it improve mobility? Are we getting a better respiratory or cardiac function? Does it improve growth and development of the condition? Is deterioration of vision and hearing slowed by the treatment? Have any impact on sleep apnea associated with the treatment? What's the impact on mortality rates and adverse events and health-related quality of life for patients and carers? And this last point is often the one where an HTA body will particularly look at patients to provide the answers. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be providing answers on all aspects of the condition. Now, without spending too long looking at that list, you'd say that's pretty comprehensive, perhaps, especially since very few of us, I imagine, have that much information about MORCHIO itself. But MPS Society came along with 3 key points that really, once you see them here, you'd say, well, of course they should be there, and why didn't we think of that? But then this is the value of the patient organisation coming on to give a recommendation here. And if think about the point I made earlier about the importance of scoping, if the MPS Society hadn't suggested pain or fatigue as a outcome to be considered, when actual information gathering phase comes along and the evaluation of the drug takes place, then the fact that this drug may or may not increase or decrease fatigue, or increase or decrease pain, would not be taken into account. So 2 points here. One, the value of patient information across the whole range of evaluation, but also the importance of being involved in designing the actual questions. And that's easy. Now, I've already alluded to the fact that MPS Society have a really high-quality register and are a well-organised patient organisation. This comes from good sources as well as good organisation. And the patient organisations will have the resource to collect a comprehensive registry over 20 years. And you can't do that at the drop of a hat either. So we EUnetHTA Clients UK are very clear that it's not trivial and it's not something that HTA bodies should expect patients to be able to do easily. We have a number of ideas about how this might be supported and how HTA bodies could change their approach to dealing with patient groups that perhaps we can address in the questions. The type of decision maker I want to talk about here is actual role in decision making, and this is the other side of the coin from the points I was making earlier on. I'm just, Karen, are you asking me a question with your hand there, or I'll let me know if there's something you want to say, Karen. In the same way we can bring information to the decision-making process, we can tell whether our information is being used appropriately in the decision-making process. We can tell whether something that may seem trivial, like such as not having to go to a hospital every day to receive your treatment and being able to take a pill once a week, whether that aspect is being considered with the right amount of value by the decision makers in the room. Always be part of a team making this decision. So is the panel really taking account of the true value to patients here? Now, it's important to recognise that this should be a disinterested patient. If you're actually likely to take the treatment itself, then you would have a conflict of interest. You should certainly not be involved in actually making that decision. And this approach, our support for this approach comes from the approach that the European Medicines Agency has taken in involving patients in scientific committees there. So back to the NICE Highly Specialised Technology Evaluation Committee, which has 3 lay members. Now that's an issue for us in that the word lay essentially means that you have no expertise, that you're a kind of an uninformed member of the public. And we feel that doesn't really take into account the expert position, the knowledge that patients have, and also potentially conflates patients with the public. Now, when you're talking about high-cost rare disease medicines, the views of the public may differ from the views of the patient community as to whether a particular medicine is cost-effective or not. They have on this committee a professional ethicist, a member of the public, and a patient representative. Probably of having just one patient representative alone in the first year of the committee, when the particular condition that this member was representing was actually the product, the indication for the product assessed for one of the 3 products they did that year. So it's important to have enough numbers to be able to maintain the patient voice when conflicts of interest occur. And the Scottish Medicines Consortium also have 2 public partners. And my point here on one of whom's been a public partner for healthcare improvement in Scotland for more than 10 years is just that you do need to have some fresh blood every now and again in these committees. What become institutionalised, I'm probably as guilty as many others. If you work in a sector for too long and if you work daily with decision makers, then potentially you can become sympathetic to the needs of the decision maker and you become less of a challenge in the decision making process. To compare that, so these HTA arrangements with the arrangements of the European Medicines Agency, and I need to be really clear, they're making different decisions. One is an HTA body and one is a regulatory authority for medicines. The first is making a cost-benefit decision, and these guys are making a safety decision. But you can see here that there are different numbers in almost every scientific committee related to human use of medicines at the European Medicines Agency. It comes from primary legislation, actually. So the fact that there are 3 at the Committee for Medicinal Products is because that's what the European Parliament wrote when they added the patient members into the original legislation. Brings me to patient voice type 3, which is as a policymaker, and this is something that our organisation does a lot of. If we can see flaws in the process, we need to work to change them. And really, we think that patients should be involved in all design stages of delivering health technology appraisal. And that essentially, if we aren't involved, then you're going to end up with a poorer design of the process. So we wanted to go back here and say, actually, we think there should be 3 patient representatives, and we can do our own ethical operations. Thanks very much. Then we could go to this, and Genetic Alliance UK has done, and say, please, can we have more patient representation in that committee? I should really make clear as a patient advocate that the most important patient voice in any access decision of medicine is that of the actual patient making a choice to take a medicine. We should all remember our right to have a informed discussion with any healthcare professional as to whether we should take a medicine. But also remember that conversation is going to happen at the end of this pathway, and they're not making a decision for all patients in the future when we go through an HTA process. For types of patient voice, I hope I haven't taken long to go through that, and I look forward to a good discussion later on. I'm going to come back to, one more point. This is, I think we're going to share these slides. This is where you can download some of the policy work that Genetic Alliance UK has done in the past. I'm going to hand back to Daphne now.
Hello, I hope you can hear me. Yes, okay, hi, just checking. Just wanted to say thank you for those presentations, Karen and Nick. I think that was really interesting and useful to hear. Now, I know that we were expecting a third presenter, so Professor Francesco Manini. He was due to talk about HTA and patient involvement, and he was going to also talk briefly about ISPO, the Italy Rome chapter, and give their perspective on how the agencies involve and integrate patients' perspectives in the reports. Unfortunately, due to unforeseen circumstances, he's unable to join us today. So we have gone straight to the panel discussion, both with Karen and Nick, and therefore I urge you all to send in your questions using the chat questions. So I do have a number of questions from the audience already. So the first one here is from one of our participants who is an advisor in the Polish HTA agency as the patient representative. But she was saying that one of the concerns or challenges they have is, as sometimes she gets asked the same or similar question as they ask the professionals, and for example about pharmacoeconomics. And I think she's wondering how one should approach that as a patient, because sometimes it's a very complex question to answer from her perspective as a patient. So Nick, perhaps you could jump in with your experiences and any advice you might have.
Yeah, so I think one thing that I think essentially that those that have gone through the EUPATI process may not need this advice, but it's certainly something that we give to our members, which is, and I alluded to it with my problem with the term lay, that if you are representing a patient community or you are affected by a particular health condition, then you are an expert. Whether if you have any questions about whether or not you should be delivering any piece of information, or whether you should include a certain aspect of the condition in your delivery of information to your HTA body, then absolutely include it. There's an environment within HTA bodies of rigor and of a kind of stuffiness and a kind of a meritocracy with lots of professors and all the rest of it sitting around the table usually. But remember that you're the expert and you really can say what you want when you get the floor, and that your view is really an informed one, and that you should get anything you want to get across and take that opportunity. If you don't take it then you probably won't get it again.
Have your perspective that you can share, I guess, from the professional side in terms of interacting with the patients on the HTA panels?
I'm fascinated by that question from the public partner in Poland. I think it's a very good one. What I would say is it's not only patient representatives that get worried about the complexity of questions they sometimes get asked at an AA decision-making table. Often, many of the other so-called experts around the table worry too. So, for example, I've sat next to clinicians, to pharmacists, who are full members of the committee, but they struggle with the economics as well. And I think that we all need to recognise that economic modelling is incredibly complex. And so we need to break it back to, in a sense, the fundamental elements and understand the kind of concepts, not the details. So, for example, an economic model is based on a care, where the new treatments in that pathway of care, and what added value does it give in terms of costs and consequences. So anything that a patient representative can provide or comment on around that is important, which is where our HTA patient group submission form is focused. So anything that can, in a sense, input to the construct of the economic model rather than sort of an economic critique of the model is what I think is key. I don't know whether that makes any sense, but it's about always stressing what a new treatment might add value, what the burden of the illness is, and so bringing it back to those kind of basic constructs and understanding those, and understanding, as Nick said, how you can contribute those to what may be quite complex arguments, but also recognising that other committee members around the table will be struggling to understand the complex statistical and economic modelling that is being discussed by just a few experts.
The element of education involved as well, I suppose. Patient perspective as well.
Absolutely. And indicated, for example, in Italy, there's a 6-day training program. The London School of Economics in the UK runs a couple of day program, and I know many patient representatives have been on that. So I think it's helpful for patient groups to understand the sort of construct of HTA. I personally don't believe that they need to understand all the detailed economic modelling, but they just need to understand how they can contribute to those general discussions about value.
Yeah. And Nick, what would your key piece of advice be for a patient group getting involved with HTA if the concept of HTA is new to them?
I mean, I think that point about making sure that you say anything you think you might want to say, you need to get it across. There are certain. I'm most familiar with NICE's process, and certainly with NICE, if you don't say the thing you want to say at one stage in the process, they actually lose the opportunity to say it later on. And if you register early enough in the process, then you use all to participate in the process later on as well. So don't hesitate and get involved. I could say just a bit about the training aspect. I think everything Karen has said is absolutely correct. I should recognise the challenge that rare disease presents, in that there are 6,000 rare diseases, and it's unlikely that the capacity of all the training programs could ever accurately get every a patient trained in time to be able to participate with an HTA program as treatments come online. And we need to recognise that, and I think certain HTA bodies could think about ways to support patient organisations through the process. Some of the early programs that went through the NICE Highly Specialised Technology program were repeats of a previous health technology program that happened that tends to be referred to as AGNES, which was the Advisory Group for National Specialised Services. And it's had a route by which essentially an independent mentor was paid for by the AGNES funding to help a patient organisation develop a submission for the AGNES appraisal process. And the benefit of that, when that information was reused in the NICE appraisal process afterwards, and the patient organisation that benefited from that, was called AHUS UK, said that without that peer support they got in the first process, they wouldn't have been able to participate in the NICE program. And they're really, if we value patient voice, have a level playing field to make sure that our cost effectiveness decisions are made on a balanced footing, but we need to make sure that every patient community that participates in HTA is equally ready to participate and equally prepared and supported to give their submission.
Thank you. And can I have a question here for you from one of our participants on the phone? It's about EUnetHTA. If you can give us a little bit more detail about that, and also whether the network is still functioning, as it were.
Yes, the European Network for HTA, it started out as a sort of research program funded by the European Commission back in 2006, and it's gone through various phases. It originally was a project of the European Commission. It's now what they call a joint action of member states. That means every member state in the European Union has agreed to work together to develop the European network for HTA. And its role really is to sort of standardize methodological processes for health technology assessment, to encourage voluntary collaboration among countries in undertaking health technology assessment, and so avoid duplication. So it's been running almost now for 10 years as EUnetHTA, and it actually had predecessors before that. And it does have a stakeholder forum that includes patient organisations, particularly, for example, the European Patient Forum is very heavily involved in it. And a member of EUnetHTA is on the EUPATI Advisory Board and has been advising on the HTA module. So the HTA material that EUPATI has is very much influenced by the European Network for HTA. So I would say it's gradually building over the last decade and certainly has a vision until 2020 and probably beyond. But it is something that works on the method side of it, because decisions about whether a product is available is still a national competency. So every country makes its own decisions. So it's not one HTA covering Europe. It's about standardized methods to improve the process of HTA in every European country.
I hope that was a concise and detailed answer to that question. And I guess this question also is back to you in terms of are there email, and also Karen as well, are there email newsletters or websites that you could recommend for patients to sign up on so they know about opportunities to participate in HTA? Because our listeners said that they might have missed opportunities that they would have loved to get involved in, because sometimes as a new patient activist, you don't have access to all the forums, or you don't sign up in time to all the newsletters. So what would both of you recommend in this instance?
First, I need to register as a stakeholder with HTA bodies that you would have an interest in responding to. So if you do that, then they will or should come to you as a stakeholder in either a particular disease area or a particular disease. Also worth being well connected with umbrella patient organisations. So our organisation in the UK will send out news of new appraisals occurring in the UK, for example. I'm not sufficiently familiar with EURORDIS to know whether they do the same on a European basis, but sign up wherever you can.
And just to add to that, a lot of the work I was talking about was undertaken by a voluntary group within the professional organisation Health Technology Assessment International, HTA, and this is a group of stakeholders, so it includes academics, HTA agencies, patient organisations, industry, all sorts of people, and we work together voluntarily to try and work out what is good practice and work together to try and share that. And the opening slide, and I think the slides will be sent round, I gave the web address for the interest subgroup of HTA for patient and citizen involvement in HTA. And on that website, there's a sign-up sort of email list, and then be in contact with information from HTA, and we try to circulate information from other networks. So we're involved in EUPATI. We've got links to ECPC, to European Patient Forum. So we try to be kind of networking with other patient groups, and there you'll find all our resources, which are all freely available and downloadable, and we encourage use and feedback on those, and we issue a monthly email newsletter via that. So please do go along and sign up to that. It's completely free, and we welcome your feedback.
Nick, and I guess related to this, your presentations as well, Nick, what would you change about the HTA process, I guess specific in England, given your experience, if you had the opportunity? So in an ideal view, how would you like to see things working?
Well, certainly make sure that there were enough members of the committee to be sure that there would be one in every deliberation process. Another quick win would be to change rules on patient voice submission in NICE to match that in Scotland, where the patient voice submission to the evaluation committee in Scotland is read out with filtering, but we have seen at NICE that the patient voice is out and kind of critiqued as it goes. So the actual message from the patients doesn't seem to be able to be seen without filtering there. And then I'd certainly implement some kind of program where a rolling set of mentors could be ready to help with the program that NICE and all HTA bodies take on to make sure that patient voice is equitably available in every health technology process. One thing clear on, the reason I can answer quickly on that is because we held sessions with our members, and we asked people affected by genetic conditions in the UK to tell us what they'd like to change about HTA after education educating them on the process and all the rest of it. So these aren't my views, they're the views of 180 patient organisations in the UK.
Could I was going to say, I would just add to that we are hugely lucky in UK that there is patient involvement in HTA. Actually, for the majority of countries, there's very little patient involvement. So what I would be saying is push for any patient involvement in HTA. As I talked about, patient involvement being a journey, so it depends who you are as to what you need to push for. So if there's no involvement, you need to be pushing for patients being able to comment on draft reports or help scope health technology assessments as a kind of first step. So I think if you can help scope and get the questions right at the outset, that makes a big difference. Then you can be asking for involvement by subscriptions, for having public representatives on committees, for having training, for all of those things. But in a sense, what Nick's describing is a very well advanced system, and for most countries in Europe, there is no involvement at all. So it's a really challenging picture.
There's been some questions about the slides, receiving slides presented at when I wanted to say that it's actually being recorded. The webinar is being recorded, so it should be available on the EUPATI website shortly. And also, in terms of staying up to date with other EUPATI events, activities, if you are a member of the network, you should also be able to sign up to the alerts and emails. Just to answer some of the questions that I've received in the chat boxes there. Related, coming back to the HTA, the question about the real value of patient involvement in HTA. So we patient-centric is a hot word, and to be involved in with patients and getting patients engaged. But Nick, what would you say if you had to? Would be the real value of actually having patients involved in HTA?
I mean, the time's come really to label patients as an equal stakeholder alongside all other stakeholders in health. And actually, really, we should probably on just slightly higher step, given that it's us that are the end beneficiaries of the healthcare system, and if our views aren't taken into account, then all the other stakeholders are operating without the most important voice. We need our information and our views need to be taken into account alongside the health service providers, healthcare professionals, insurers or reimbursers, alongside industry, the research community. The patient voice needs to sit there at exactly the same level, and really to be able to answer any of the questions that those might be asked as well. We have our area of expertise, but we shouldn't have any. There should be no limits in what we can say. So I agree entirely with Karen that potentially our efforts are best not aimed at seeking economic models, but best aimed at providing information that only our community would have. But really, if you don't include our voice, then you're doing a much worse job.
And to comment on that?
I think this whole question of the impact of patient involvement is a really good one, and it's one that's been challenging us for a while. So I coordinate the HTA Patient Involvement Methods and Impact Working Group. And actually, nobody has systematically measured the impact of patient involvement in HTA. What we're trying to do at the moment is think about how we can do that. We are trying to gather case studies, and Nick, in his presentation, I think gave you some wonderful case studies. So the fact that a patient group had a registry of all the people in the country with disease is really important, and registries can provide really, really helpful information because they're key in modelling the disease. But it's not just that, it's perspective as well. Nick's example again about the outcomes that are important to patients. We hear a lot about this at the moment, patient-reported outcomes, but patient-relevant outcomes is an area that patients can tell us about. And that can change the way we perceive value. And the whole HTA is about what value does a technology add. And see, when a patient says to us, actually, the outcome that was studied for the regulatory authority is not important to us. The most important thing is perhaps fatigue, as mentioned here, because often it can be fatigue that stops an individual being able to perform duties, being able to go to work. And often it's those elements which are quite hard to actually measure that can be important to patients. Sometimes regulators can HTA bodies can miss, and they need to have that understanding to be able to understand the real value of a medicine. So I think it's a really good question. It's one we can't answer well at the moment, but it's one which a number of us are trying to look at. So ISPOR is gathering case studies from patient organisations about their involvement in HTA, and they'll be presenting that in Milan in November. A good question. I'm afraid we don't have a good answer yet, but many HTA doers would absolutely say that patients have made a difference to their decision making, and that's the value of patient involvement that can affect decision making.
As the number of examples increase, that will all point towards confirmation or demonstration of the HTA value, patient involvement, I suppose. And
just one. Sorry to interrupt you there. Just one observation from the European Medicines Agency. They have done some, and again, to be clear, this is a different process, so covering a different question, but they have done a bit of work on covering how patient voices help their decision making. But usually all the committees have come back saying we absolutely can't do this without patient voice now, having had initial skepticism. So there might be an element of HTA bodies just trying it, and then once you've tried it, they might see the benefit without too much evidence beforehand.
Related to that, Nick, there was a question about reimbursement and compensation, if and how patients are reimbursed for their time and input in HTA, maybe just based from your experience.
So I should again emphasize, Karen's point that I'm essentially working from quite a privileged position in that we're representing UK patients, and the UK does have a relatively good landscape for patients to participate in HTA decisions, in that some of the best opportunities are here. That doesn't mean that we have ideas on how to improve it, but it means that we're focused a little bit in different directions from other countries. Here there is significant reimbursement. It's not a trivial amount of money that's given. It's usually not as much money as has cost the organisation to participate, though. So for participation in a nice evidence gathering stage of the process, scoping you don't reimburse for. Before, after scoping, when you start generating evidence and delivering it, you can get, I believe, around £1,000, so around £500. I can't remember the exact number. Significant, but probably not as much as the value of the information itself.
And what's the one thing we can do to strengthen patient involvement in HTA? And I realize we've been talking, there might have been some overlaps in some of the other points you've already discussed, but for example, Nick, from your perspective, again, for the listeners on the phone today, how they could go out and strengthen or get involved in the HTA process?
Well, we can all learn from examples of patient organisations. The register is just one way that certain expert patient organisations and excellent patient organisations have really contributed to the development of knowledge in their disease area. And I think the more we can learn from each other, the better. But be aware, make sure that your horizon scanning is at least as good as the health technology appraisal bodies. Follow what's happening at the market authorization stage of medicines development. You can start your work earlier, so the actual appraisal process won't come as a surprise to you. You've already started thinking about what the key outcome for the treatment for your community is, and you've already started gathering evidence as to what that means for people, and case studies, potentially even having the time and resource to do some quantitative work to get a real picture of the burden of illness that's within your community that might be treated by the condition. So aware and scan the horizon. Say how to do that. So follow the European Medicines Agency's feeds is one key one, and also check what phase 3 clinical trials are happening using some of the surveillance databases such as clinicaltrials.org. If you see phase 3 trials happening in your disease area and it's an unmet health need, then you might be 3 or 4 years away from an actual treatment and one want to get ready.
Sure. And how about, Karen, in terms of maybe a tangible one thing we can do in order to strengthen patient involvement in HTA?
I had 3 things. It's going to talk about something we haven't talked about yet, but which is really important. That is being at the EMA website to actually think about getting involved in the design of clinical trials. So actually getting involved, being on trial steering committees to help ensure that clinical trials are designed to meet the patients in terms of the right outcomes being addressed, to make sure that the design is as optimal as possible. And that's where the EUPATI training becomes really important. There's been an understanding that in the past, clinical trials were more designed to meet the needs of regulators who were looking at the quality, safety, and efficacy of a product. So does it work in controlled conditions? Now there is this focus also on the clinical effectiveness. Does it work in a local context compared to the best standard of care, and the cost effectiveness? And actually, if patients have some awareness of that, they can get involved in that clinical trial design. And there is now more opportunity through EUnetHTA to get involved in so-called scientific advice processes where patients can join with other experts to advise companies on the design of clinical studies. I've been involved in that process with NICE, and I've seen the work that EUnetHTA is doing, and that's hugely valuable. And certainly the feedback to me has been that patients' input into those really discussions about the design of confirmatory clinical trials is really important. So I would say start there, start as early as you can. And then taking on board Nick's point, very, very wise about, sort of having gathering your evidence to describe the burden of illness and your experience with current treatments, but to think also about how you can work with other organizations, so other umbrella bodies. So I've often thought that, some of the umbrella patient organizations could have a sort of standard template which describes the burden of an illness and experience with current treatments, current pathways, and that could almost be taken down by individual country patient organizations and used in their own processes. So those are 2 things patient organizations could do. But one important other aspect we haven't talked about, and that is qualitative research. That may sound a bit odd, something from a statistician who likes numbers, but qualitative research is a sound scientific way of observing individuals and hearing what they say and drawing those perspectives together through sociological theory. And it was something that was used 15 years ago in HTA, and really has less focus now because there's been so much focus on economics. I say we need more focus in HTA on the social aspect, how we can do good research. So it's scientists that should be out there sort of working with patients rather than patient groups having to do all the work. We need to get scientists and HTAs investing in research to elicit patient perspectives and to draw that together in a way that can influence decision making.
Okay, Karen, that was a very detailed answer and of real value. I also have a question here about how the pharmaceutical industry fits into HTA. We some I think some callers in from the industry perspective as well, and I think that's interesting for them and our callers to hear how you see the industry fitting in this landscape.
With that one, so in terms of how industry rich involvement in HTA, it's a very sensitive area, I think, because we must ensure that patient organisations are seen as independent and not influenced by industry. It is a concern by many HTA agencies that patient organisations are driven by industry. And for this reason, many HTA agencies asked patient organisations to present conflicts of interest and so have to show how much they are funded by industry. So when I work with patient organisations, we recognise that they need to get funding from somewhere. Industry is one funder, it's not the only funder. Recommend that they have a range of funders, some of which may be from industry, but the industry shouldn't be a dominant funder in anything they do. I recommend that they take unrestricted research grants from industry, because industry obviously has a lot to offer. And what I was talking about just now about designing clinical trials, it's industry designing the clinical trials. So I believe patients should be working with industry to make those trials as good as possible, to make sure that there's the right outcomes and that people are retained in the trials and we've got the best data possible. But there does need to be some sensitivity there about that relationship. And I won't talk about how industry gets involved in HTA because that isn't the subject of this seminar, and there are other areas that industry can go to get the answers to those questions.
Yeah, thanks for that.
Just a point on the conflict of interest that can raise there. Our organisation has an ethical collaboration policy which we publish on our website, which is a set of terms that are publicly available that can see under what circumstances we accept industry funding and how independent our output is following that arrangement. And to help with the whole conflict of interest, transparency is really important. Patient organisations declare they do receive funds from pharma and don't show all of the funds as they've received, then you're your own worst enemy there. Really, we need to be as clear as can on what we're using the money for and how much we've got.
Great, thanks, Nick. Now I'm just keeping an eye on time, and I suppose I have one last question for both of you in terms of what would your takeaway message be to our listeners. Nick, if you could summarize our discussions today.
Well, I mean, congratulations on being on the EUPATI program. I think a lot of us are looking forward to see the outcomes of the program and hopefully seeing many more members of the patient community alongside us making informed contributions to health technology appraisal decisions and all sorts of other aspects of the innovation pathway. I'm going to return to the point that the PATs are certainly an expert of equal stature to all other participants in the decision making, and potentially of a higher stature. So we need to remember that as a community, that we're the experts. Anything that we think we might want to say, we should certainly say.
Okay, thank you. And for you, Karen, as well, what would you say was the takeaway message for our listeners today?
I think my takeaway message would be that patients have unique knowledge about the burden of illness and experience of current treatments that should contribute to health technology assessment, but that there are some concerns from some about involved patients, and so we need to do all we can to convince decision makers that patients can contribute to these decision-making processes in a way that is not adversarial, but according to fairness and legitimacy and equity, as outlined in the HTA values, is absolutely essential. So we need to encourage that from a kind of public and policy perspective, patients must be involved. We need clear processes for that involvement to make sure that engagement is fair. And to achieve this, we need capacity building. We need to make sure that everyone is trained. So the EUPATI training is really important, but also we need to do more training of HTA agencies and more celebration of the wonderful ways we've seen that patients have been involved in HTA. As Nick mentioned earlier, when you've had a patient expert on a committee, any committee recognises the real value of these patient experts and the colour that patient evidence brings to any process. So we need to share more of these experiences and try and encourage patient involvement across, not in Europe, but obviously internationally as well.
For that, Karen and Nick. So with that, I want to say to all our listeners who've already hung on the phone, thank you so much for attending this webinar, for your questions that you have put forward. And I think this presentation really has been of high interest. As mentioned before, we will have the slides recorded. They're being recorded and they will be available after, hopefully. And please also sign up to the EUPATI newsletters to be alerted of future events such as this. So with that, I want to thank again Karen and Nick for the presentations and all our participants for their questions and comments they've put forward. And hopefully hear you and interact with you on our next webinar to come shortly. Thank you very much. And good